So we're looking at pest management and ecology because you really need to start thinking about ecological concerns when you're dealing with managing pests, especially if you're using pesticides. So ecology is the study of connections in nature. It's how organisms interact with one another in their non-living environment. And breaking this down, are individuals or any individual that's a living thing or organism. Population is a group of individuals of a given species that live in a specific geographic area at any given time. A community is all the populations in a specific area at a given time, includes populations of organisms of different species. An ecosystem is a community of living or biotic organisms in conjunction with non-living or abiotic components in their environment. They interact as a system. They're linked together through nutrient cycles and energy. And then the biosphere is the sum of all ecosystems established on planet Earth, and these are living. So here's a picture of our abiotic and biotic components of the ecosystem. We've got oxygen, we've got carbon dioxide, we've got precipitation, mineral nutrients, etc. That's the abiotic portion of the ecosystem, and our animals, our plants, our organisms, those are all part of the biotic components. So natural selection is the process where organisms better adapted to their environment tend to survive and produce more offspring. In this case, we have pesticide that is applied to a population of insects, and the resistant individuals survive and reproduce. The pesticide is less effective, and the resistant pests continue to grow and reproduce. So one example of this is our silverleaf whitefly. It is a super pest. It's resistant to pesticides. Now, this is more of a greenhouse pest, but it's really important if you're trying to produce things like cole crops, poinsettia, eggplant, etc. It's actually hundreds of plants this affects, and it can spread diseases such as tomato yellow leaf curl virus in tomatoes, but that's just one of many diseases that it can spread. So a genotype is an individual's collection of genes, while a phenotype is the physical properties of an organism that are produced by the genotype and the environment. So one example here, we've got our Phragmites australis, or common reed, in Washington State. And it's a Class B noxious weed, which means in some communities, some counties, it needs to be managed as an A weed, which is eradication, because it hasn't gotten such a foothold. That's not the case in our counties. It's very prominent in our counties. There are non-native and native genotypes of this. The non-native Phragmites is invading waterways in both eastern and western Washington. And through genotyping, they've actually been able to determine that all the populations in King County are non-native. Okay, so phenotypes, they display different phenotypes according to conditions. In this case, we've got annual sow thistle. On left, we've got our very dry and sunny condition, so pretty sparsely foliated and very few long, skinny stems. And in the center, this is shady and well watered, and then on the right, that's your typical annual sow thistle in a backyard. So habitat is the place or set of environmental conditions in which a particular organism lives, and an ecological niche are all the components of the habitat with which the organism or population interacts. In this case, we've got garlic mustard, which is a Class A noxious weed in our state. And it's highly competitive and able to form monotypic stands. It also tends to hold on to leaves during the winter. And so it's able to still continue to photosynthesize, so it can shade out other things. It produces root exudates and it inhibit the growth of important soil fungi and leaf chemicals that kill native butterfly larvae that feed on the plant. It's a Class A noxious weed, as I mentioned, in the state. Okay, here we have yellow nutsedge, which is a Class B noxious weed in Washington state. Highly adaptable to irrigated agricultural areas. It is believed to be allelopathic, which produces chemicals to prevent other plants from growing. They occupy sunny areas and waterlogged soil, and they can indicate low areas, overwatering, and a break in irrigation. And this is what I'm talking about when you have a Class B noxious weed. There are certain counties that have very high populations, and they are going to have a really challenging time managing it. But when you've got a smaller population like we have in King, Pierce, Thurston County, it is manageable. So it's treated like an A weed. It's supposed to be eradicated when it's found. So population density is a group of individuals of a given species that live in a specific geographic area at a given time. And here we have aphids living on roses, not an uncommon sight in our gardens in the spring and summer. Population density is the measure of the number of organisms that make up a population in a defined area. But no population can increase its size indefinitely. They're competing for light, water, and nutrients, and there's only so much of that to go around. And competitors and or predators are going to be plentiful in these areas. So limiting factors, this is density-dependent factors, include competition for resources, predation, parasitism, and disease. This has a different effect on population growth when populations are high versus when they are low. Prey is easily found when there's high prey density, so a higher portion of the population is killed by predation than when they are harder to find. Your predators are going to tend to go somewhere else where they're going to find bigger populations. Density-independent factors include floods, drought, fire, freeze, pesticide applications. So ecotypes are a population that is adapted to local environmental conditions. So a pathotype is a strain of a plant pathogen that adapted to particular cultivars of a host plant. So there's a new pathotype of pepper mild mottle virus that has been able to overcome the resistance of previous resistant pepper cultivars. In other words, plants that would normally have been able to be resistant to this disease are now showing less resistance to this. So abundance is the number of individuals of a species in an area. Diversity is the number of different species in an area, and it's a very useful measure of the variety of niches or genetic variation in a community. This decreases as we go from the equator towards the poles. And really, this depends on total resource availability in an ecosystem. Ecotones are the boundaries between adjacent habitats. This is often where you see the biggest species diversity. So here's an example here, a boundary between a forest and a meadow. Edge effects are the environmental and biotic conditions at an edge of a habitat, temperature, moisture, predator species, etc. So this is very associated with habitat fragmentation and very detrimental to species diversity. And I'm sure you've seen this in areas where we've had a lot of new buildings going on, especially when you get out of the city. And these trees are used to having support from other trees. So you're going to have a lot of problems with trees going over. So with competition, you have interest-specific competition. This is in a community. There's competition for resources among members of the same species. And then interspecific competition. These are competitions for resources between members of different species. And of course, the resources include light, food, water, space, etc. And this is where our invasive species have the advantage. They're able to compete more than some of the native communities for these species. They're able to get bigger, they don't have natural enemies, various reasons why they're able to outcompete native plants. Another group of communities are mutualistic. So both members of the partnership benefit. In this case, we're talking about mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi, this is a generalization, but in general, they are able to get carbon from trees, and in return, often will be able to access nutrients that the plants may not be able to access otherwise. There also may be some disease protection associated with this. So managed ecosystems reduce biodiversity by destroying, fragmenting, and degrading our habitats. It reduces biodiversity by simplifying natural communities. This is where we have monocultures, where there's only one species that dominates, and then an opportunistic species and pathogen threaten these single species. So pest ecology, I'm going to look at it here as far as the disease triangle. So in order to have disease occur, you need these three things, and there could be a fourth thing, which would be time, but you need to have the pathogen there, you need to have a susceptible host plant, and you need to have a favorable environment. And we'll talk a little more about this, but basically you want to assume that the pathogen is there. You want to make sure you're planting plants that are either resistant to disease or planted in such a way that they're as healthy as they can be. And you want to provide the right environment for the plant, not for the pathogen. So usually this means watering correctly or putting it in the right place. Okay, so your book talks about our selected species. These have high growth rates. They have a high reproductive rate. I'll talk about what these look like. They populate less dense ecological niches. They're generalists. K-selected species have a low reproductive rate, high survivability, long life. They mature later, and they have a very special niche that they fill. So R-selected species tend to be opportunists. K-selected species tend to be competitors. So saguaro is considered a K-selected species. It doesn't even flower until it's 35 years of age. The branches or arms form at 50 to 70 years, and that's if they're getting adequate water. If it's getting less water, it could be 100 years. And it does produce a lot of seeds, but due to predation, few of them become plants. And these are our typical R-selected species. Of course, dandelion, they will occupy just about any habitat. They produce tons of seeds. Aphids, spider mites, they reproduce a lot of young and are able to take over quite quickly.